Hello everybody, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. We have a good one for you as always, and just when you think the breaking news stops, well, you get proven wrong, don't you? J.D. Vance is selected as the Trump running mate, 39 years old, well known for Hillbilly Elegy and much more, including a big right-wing face turn that we will get. We're going to go through some of the reaction to the pick on both sides of the aisle, including from surprising sources in labor. Also, we're going to continue to give the latest on the assassination investigation into Donald Trump. And Joe Biden is sitting for an interview with Lester Holt. First question is about some of the kind of bullseye rhetoric, talking about putting Trump in a bullseye. Biden is questioned by that on Lester Holt, by Lester Holt, and we'll find out what he had to say. The polls and the vibes are looking grim for the Biden campaign in the wake of the Trump assassination. And we have more crazy comments from another interview to complex news of all sources Joe Biden gave, talking about the issues really mattering to young people in this election, including his continuing facilitation of an ongoing genocide. We have all that and so much more, all the analysis you need to be informed. This is Newsflash. All right, so we start with the announcement. J.D. Vance is officially the vice president. He is he's someone who's always been a bit of a maverick, I guess, in various different ways. Someone who's kind of always been a bit of a political chameleon. So it is kind of hard to know what he truly believes and what instances of his personality that he's tried to emphasize. He started off as somebody who was really desperate to escape the kind of working class Rust Belt kind of area that he grew up in. He went to Yale Law School, was incredibly successful with Peter Thiel's venture capitalist firm. Peter Thiel, again, helped him get elected to Senate in 2021. But he was also someone who, up until 2021, in the early Trump years, was more liberal. He wrote a book, Hillbilly Elegy, which is essentially, about how lazy and uncultured, and how everyone wants to blame everyone but themselves. In the Rust Belt, with regards to all the problems they face, from opioids to deindustrialization and all that stuff. Just a pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. That in that time when a lot of people were really shocked by the Trump win and were really trying to understand what these white working class voters were so mad about, it was a very kind of comforting answer that he was able to give to great acclaim to members of the media. And his book obviously became a movie, and I believe it won an Oscar. So that is obviously very different from his post-2021 position, where he has really become, I think in the truest sense of the word, and you can see a lot of the fakeness behind it, a right-wing populist. It has fooled some people. This is Sean O'Brien talking to Fox News in the wake of the announcement.
I mean, J.D. Vance, the short time that we've worked together, he's been great on Teamster issues. He is co-sponsored an airline manufacturing bill that addresses outsourcing of critical airline maintenance to China. He's also supported paid sick leave for our railroad workers. If you remember that situation a couple of years ago, where they weren't getting sick time, he stepped right up. He's also been very vocal and supportive of holding employers accountable who try and skirt their obligation under an independent contractor model known as DSP. So he's been right there on all our issues.
That's Teamsters President Sean O'Brien, one of probably the top two biggest labor leaders in the country. Maybe give it to AFL-CIO Liz Shuler and maybe Sean Fain. Definitely Sean Fain, I think, beats him at this point. But anyway, the point is he's a pretty big deal, and he's somebody who I think has really gotten this, wrong in a big way. He is somebody who I feel like did kind of miss the what J.D. Vance is trying to do here is because he does have a very, very extreme set of social issues. He's somebody who has been, he's rumored to give you a sense of, it's pretty almost confirmed, I think, essentially at this point, but he, for a long time during his Senate campaign, was online with a group of these conservative posters, some of whom are like on Twitter, who are as young as 16, 17 on this Twitter group chat talking about, oh, these are my simps, and I love to, talk about conservative policy, and the policy at that time was, blaming migrants. It was, the wokeism stuff, the anti-trans stuff. This was the era of all this crazy, crazy stuff, like, the kids, asking to poop in litter boxes because they identify as cats. This was the stuff that people like that were pushing, and it's a big reason why they lost the 2022 election in such a big way. This is from the New York Times on that. So a pretty big kind of convention day as Trump announced his vice presidential selection on Truth Social after he said he picked Vance after lengthy deliberation and thought, pointing to his service in the Marines and the fact that his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, had become a best-selling book, even though it kind of does trash. He was somebody who was a very anti-Trump guy at the time when he did Hillbilly Elegy, maybe not something he wants to kind of call attention to. Somebody who said he admired Obama and Obama inspired him to get out of the holler and go do great things. And I think the very telling quote is, it's one of the New York Times stories about this. He goes and blames the people in the town, and now from before, and now he's blaming. This was in the pre-Senate era, pre his Senate election, and now he's right-wing populist. He blames outsourcing and immigration. So there's a lot of the heavy on the immigration, because I would like to generally get Sean O'Brien's take on this. It's like, do you see him standing up for outsourcing, particularly? Or stopping outsourcing when it comes to an administration that has promised so much to big business? Is he going to be really that person who stands up there? And I'll give Marcy Kaptur some credit on this. She was at I believe it was a UAW stand-up strike, and she kind of saw through a lot of his bit when he showed up to a picket line with her. This was, I believe, in 2023, mid-2023.
Very well. How are you doing?
Nice to see you, Marcy.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
First time here?
First time here. Yep.
Thank you for coming.
Of course.
All right, what can we do for you?
So she doesn't even shake his hand there. She's just like, first time here? Yep. And so that that shows you, I think, a great representation of this kind of not necessarily super left wing, but definitely pro labor old guard of the Democratic Party, who has been around these struggles for quite a long time, and this kind of newer populist right wing set that does do a lot of these gestures. He's spoken up against outsourcing, and mostly as a means of kind of attacking China, not really attacking some of the big corporations. He's been very anti-Ukraine is a kind of a vague sense of, the money should be spent at home, but has been a lot more supportive of other wars, including particularly supportive of Israel. So again, there's a lot of this kind of gesturing at vaguely popular policies, a lot of times I think for the wrong reasons, I guess I get the wrong reasons, at least in my opinion, the wrong reasons, but the reasons that not a lot of people who, share those beliefs and are sometimes suckered in by the rhetoric, they're not coming at it from the same angle as J.D. Vance is. So, that is, I think it's very, very telling. Trump said here, as Vice President, J.D. will continue to fight for our Constitution, stand with our troops, and will do everything he can to help make America great again, he said, writing his slogan in all caps. Meanwhile, just for the rest of the convention, the list of speakers will be Katie Britt of Alabama, Tim Scott of South Carolina, Marshall Blackburn of Tennessee, the Governors Glenn Youngkin of Virginia and Kristi Noem of South Dakota, and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. We'll get to some of the Biden counter-programming there in a moment. But, of course, the convention coming under renewed security due to the recent assassination attempt. And we'll get to some more of that in just a moment, a little update. But this is from a Vox piece that just came out today. So Vance has said that had he been vice president in 2020, he would have carried out Trump's scheme for the vice president to overturn the election results. He has fundraised for by the way, expect that to be blasted absolutely everywhere. He has fundraised for January 6th rioters. He once called on the Justice Department to open a criminal investigation into a Washington Post columnist who penned a critical piece about Trump. After last week's assassination attempt on Trump, he attempted to whitewash his radicalism by blaming the shooting on Democrats' rhetoric without an iota of without an iota of evidence. Saying it's Democrats' rhetoric about democracy and democracy coming to end that is really responsible for this. The worldview translate, and by the way, the guy who shot him was a literal registered Republican, so make of that what you will. In a podcast interview, he I think Biden's been talking about a lot of about Project 2025. I think a good way of understanding Vance is this kind of more polished, almost a human embodification of the more Project 2025, which is the kind of the more polished, more extreme, more determined, more empowered version of Trumpism, which really involves, again, as he says here, firing every single mid-level bureaucrat in U.S. government and replace them with our people. If the courts attempt to stop this, Vance says Trump should simply ignore the law, a la Andrew Jackson Indian Removal Act of 1832. They've made the ruling, now let them enforce it. So that is really where he's at, really just a radical takeover of the government to pursue these kind of conservative priorities. And I think, no doubt, he will be painted as that as time goes on. And I think, the bottom line on this is, as we're talking about, overrated on some of the populist economic arguments. I think that is something that I genuinely do not buy when it comes to him. I don't see him as this kind of guy who's going to stand up really and cares about this stuff. I mean, he was talking about, just a few years ago, he was working for Peter Thiel and talking about how all, the poor people are lazy and they don't want to make any, positive change in their lives. So he's somebody who's a bit of a political chameleon, to say the least, and is somebody who's good at meeting the moments. But, there is, I think, real questions about how he meets the moment in some of the economic ways very effectively. Meanwhile, he will kind of continue to effectively stoke this right-wing social, cultural resentment, within this right-wing base. That's going to be something that he's going to be very, very effective at doing. He's really enlightened some of these passions of, like the people he was in the group chat with, the 16, 17-year-old crazies on Twitter who, just post things like, I want a trad wife. I want to live on a farm again. Take me back to the good old days, and just all this really diluted stuff that's really hard to explain to people who aren't on Twitter. And without using these very, very online terms that really reveal how hopelessly and chronically and online that I am. So I think he's really going to be able to continue to stoke that resentment among the right wing base in these TV interviews and things like that. But I think bottom line is he is somebody who, again, most people, there is that kind of certain set of people that he kind of speaks at the frequency to activate in terms of these kind of extreme right-wing and mostly cultural views. But to a lot of people, he just comes off as this weird, very extreme guy who didn't represent his fringe cultural ideals on blaming immigrants and LGBTQ people for a lot of the nation's problems, outsourcing and the decline of the industrial Midwest in particular, and this kind of broad cultural degradation in the country, and politicians who don't care about you and sold all your jobs to China and just only care about Pride Month and all these things. It's a lot of his kind of rhetoric summed up, and also, by the way, to put that right in there with the very extreme abortion position that he has taken. He was somebody who was really lobbying against the abortion access referendum that failed. He was lobbying for the pro-life side when the pro-choice side in Ohio, which is a very red state, won pretty overwhelmingly last year. And so the abortion thing is going to be something you can expect to see a lot more of in the future. He did not represent any of those positions well in the Ohio Senate race in 2022, where Tim Ryan did very, very well and made gains pretty much throughout the state. And while Trump thinks he will do well on TV, again, it's mostly going to be activating that right-wing base set. I think he's going to come off mostly to a lot of people as a kind of nerdy, overly intellectual. Again, it's the general American public, that we're dealing with here. So, over intellectual will kind of, I think, be a problem for him. But also, the biggest problem by far is going to be the stuff that he's being over intellectual about, which is this very extreme right wing stuff. We need to remake the states and fire all the civil. If he gets pressed on that, and he's answers to that, I think he's not going to be doing a very good job, and just kind of comes off as this nerdy, extreme weirdo. And I think for that reason, he's going to be a liability, because there's so many different ways the Democrats could attack him. And I swear to God, if they start to be like, oh, well, he used to support Trump, he used to support Hillary Clinton. He used to be a Democrat back in 2017. That is not the right way to go. Tar and feather him on the extreme stuff that he's been saying lately that is much more effective. All this crazy stuff about, January 6th, carrying out the fake elector scheme that Pence was, threatened with hanging for failing to carry out. He said he would do that. All this very extreme stuff on abortion, on LGBTQ, on immigration, that is stuff that they should absolutely hammer. Not he used to be a Democrat, he used to be a liberal back in that is not going to be nearly as effective. But there are so many different ways for Democrats to hit on and attack this guy and paint him as another part of the extreme Donald Trump candidacy, and he doesn't really bring anything to the ticket with expanding Trump's appeal to bigger parts of a very polarized electorate. And I think this really broadly is a sign of Trump's confidence when it comes to his really belief that I kind of got this on lock. I'm going to be able to win this. I'm going to be able to put this in the bag. So I'm going to secure the base. I'm going to build the movement and maybe even set up an heir apparent for the future. I'd say pretty much bottom line there on the Vance appointment. So up next, we had the latest on the Trump shooting. The FBI said on Monday that it had gained access to data on the cell phone of the man who tried to assassinate Donald Trump as investigators continue to search for a motive in the shooting at the former president's weekend campaign rally. And as I talked about with Myron on the show yesterday, it feels like, wow, I can't believe that was yesterday. It seems like with the Republican, the very Republican signs the guy had, he was literally wearing like a right-wing militia shirt when he went into the rally. Neighbors had seen some of the Trump signs on the lawn. He's obviously a registered Republican. We talked about that. That point was seeming, to hint pretty strongly that he is a Republican. That's within the bounds of, I guess, responsible reporting there to say there's some pretty clear signs. The motive there still isn't clear. It could have been somebody who was also deeply mentally ill, and that was something that affected the way he decided to act in terms of going in there. He was somebody who was a bullied guy, according to his classmates. He was somebody who tried out for the rifle team, but was rejected because of how bad a shot he was. Apparently, it's like this team that takes everyone. It's a rifle just shooting club. After school, you go have a fun time shooting guns. Only in rural America, but the club when he went there was like, you're such a bad shot, don't come back, it's too dangerous. And then he goes on to shoot the president. Some really crazy stuff. Attention focused on the Secret Service's apparent failure to secure the rally site in western Pennsylvania, which I think is a very big, kind of surprising question there that's going to be interesting to get into. It's maybe just some laziness, some sort of incompetence. Surprising amount of people, just normie people that I was talking to over the last few days, thinking it's staged. It's definitely something that's sus in some way, to put it in the Gen Z parlance. Alejandro Mayorkas said that adjustments have been made, not only Trump's protection detail, but also to those of President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Robert Kennedy, the independent presidential candidate, will also now be granted Secret Service protection. Also, at the urging of Trump, as Trump's nominating convention kicked off in Milwaukee, Republicans in Congress vowed to investigate the Secret Service's decisions ahead of the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania. That left Trump grazed by a bullet, a rally-goer dead, and 2 others gravely wounded. Biden has called for an independent review of security measures before and after the shooting. And on Monday, he and Ms. Harris received a briefing from Homeland Security and law enforcement officials. In a speech on Sunday night, the president said, "We can't allow this violence to be normalized." But, so far, it seems like Americans have kind of been handling in a relatively subdued way, considering the circumstances of an assassination attempt on the former president, current presidential candidate in Donald Trump. There was just one YouGov poll so far, I think, has come out, and that says it's literally no change from before the assassination on the 11th of July. So, if that's American politics for you, we are pretty damn polarized. Video taken by a bystander and analyzed by New York Times shows people pointing to the suspected gunman and frantically warning law enforcement 2 minutes before the first burst of gunfire ran out. The video adds to, once again, to questions about how much warning time the Secret Service had before its agents shot and killed the federal gunman. So classmates, again, attended, describing the gunman in interviews as smart but solitary, quiet student who did not want attention, walking through halls with his head down and rarely raising his hands in class. Some students teased him, his classmates said. Trump said he had thrown out the tough speech that he had planned to deliver at this week's RNC and was apparently trying to draft one more unifying. So we'll see how he goes with that. While he is apparently highly, highly emphasized here, trying to soften his tone, President Biden was questioned about his language in the first clip from the NBC News interview that just started with Lester Holt.
Let's talk about the conversation this has started, and it's really about language, what we say out loud, and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat. On a call a week ago, you said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term was bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that won't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win. And so the focus was on what he's saying and, I mean, the idea.
But have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody?
He's got a good point there.
I have not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses, talking about how he's going to forgive all the, actually, I guess, suspend the sentences of all those who were arrested and sentenced to go to jail because of what happened in the Capitol. I'm not out there making fun of, like, remember the picture of Donald Trump when Nancy Pelosi's husband was hit with a hammer, joking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good, accurate point there by Joe Biden, who made it, pretty coherently as well, I might add. When it comes to the outlay of the battle between explosive rhetoric, on both sides, you could point to much higher officials in the Republican Party using much crazier language than anything you have in the Democratic Party. So, I mean, if I were the Democrats and Republicans want to make this about an issue of who is inciting violence the most, who is raising their rhetoric to extremes the most, I think if I were lead Democratic strategist, that would be, I'd say, bring it on. We got the clips, 4 days, especially of Trump, saying all these crazy things. But again, with this whole, we need to take a step back. I think this is not 2004 anymore. We're living in a post-Trump era. We're living in a post-COVID era. We're living, in the post, BLM era. Like, so many crazy things have happened that have really divided and, kind of polarized people into different political camps. In a way that they, previously never have been before. This was 2004. So we need to come together as a country. We're not Team Red, we're Team Blue. But a lot of people at this point, especially the people who are tuned in and engaged in politics every day, they're just like, yes, the hell we are. We bleed blue, we bleed red, and it's not going to be, the best thing for the country all the time. But I do think maybe a silver lining in it has been that President Biden, someone who's been, a very moderate, very boring, very, uncontroversial guy like Joe Biden, who has always tried to, hew to the less moderate, less controversial, or more moderate, less controversial lane in terms of answers, in terms of rhetoric and politics like this. Even he now, in the political culture we're in, is saying, you want me to go easy on Trump when he's this much of a threat to democracy? Like, just because he got shot at? Like, do you want me to, if I believe it's a real threat, do you want me to stop talking about it because it may incite someone? Like, just have somebody who is that, career focused, who is that, much of a true Washington creature, respond to that. I think it shows you that we are in a place now where we're just going to be, we just need to come together around Trump, and we need to just because he got shot at, we need to unify, we need to tone down, when obviously Republicans are never going to go tone down. Like, if Biden had been shot at, they've been making fun of him today. Like, Fox News would be openly making fun of him in the same way that they made fun of Paul Pelosi when he got hit with the hammer. When someone tried to break into the Pelosi house. So, yeah, like it's one thing, to acknowledge the coarse society that we live, or the coarser kind of political society that we live in, where it's like, we're dropping onto the facade, we're dropping onto the mask, when it's convenient, or when it's inconvenient for you, but, when it's convenient for you to suddenly turn back and be like, we need to go back to a country with values and morals, that's a bunch of BS. I think when even Joe Biden now is seeing through it, which I think is a very good sign. He is not entirely out of the woods yet, though. He is locked in a tight race with former President Donald Trump. And, a lot of that, I think, just taking the shooting out of it for a moment, a lot of these kind of concerns, and to give credit, I do, giving Joe Biden credit is not something that, if you listen to the show, that I often do, especially in the last 9 months or so. And we'll play, another pretty crazy clip of him in just a moment. The Democrats were kind of not falling for this whole 2004, 2000, pre-Trump era, pre-Obama era, even civility BS. Like, that is a good sign, even when it's coming from Joe Biden. It makes it even more surprising. But, there is a lot of Democrats who are would be leading the edge on this a lot more. And we see this now in brand new polls today that say, this is from the 9th to the 12th of July, that say how Biden and Harris fare against Trump in critical swing states. This is in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and Trump is ahead in Pennsylvania, both polls against Biden versus Harris, but Trump is up by 3, which is about matches where he's been, 4 or 5 points, 3 to 5 points, kind of margin in a lot of other polls. But don't look now, Kamala Harris just losing by 1 to Trump in Pennsylvania, which putting her in a much better position, given, again, that she hasn't even begun this campaign. She hasn't had the full mobilization of the Democratic base behind her in a lot of these different ways, and this option hasn't been provided. But we're already seeing her rise from below Biden to level to being clearly above Biden here. Virginia is a state where Biden won by like 6-7 points, just romped last time pretty easily, and Harris is kind of more on that track with a +5 split over Trump, 49 to 44. But Biden just 3 points separating, 48 to 45. Trump and Biden, who is leading. Biden is leading in Virginia. And that really shows you in another way that we're continuing to see evidence again and again of polls showing the rise of Kamala Harris relative to Trump, to a point where she is almost, consistently getting level, but in these two polls, pretty well surpassing Joe Biden when it comes to, making this argument. I think the state of the race fundamentally is going to be pretty unchanged by the shooting. There's going to be a lot of, it's going to be a big cultural event. There's going to be a lot of memes about it, but a lot of those people who are doing the most memeing are probably the least likely to vote when it comes down to it. And a lot of people who already are going to vote have their minds very much made when it comes to Trump and Biden. I think the debate is going to have a much bigger issue because it really emphasized some big concerns about Biden and put them on screen in a way that a lot of people, feared wasn't true. The Democrats had kind of done a pretty good job at this point, convincing there was nothing up till that point, convincing the, general voters that they're, it wasn't great for Biden's age, but it was, doable. That was a real big wake-up moment. But, I think the wonderful newsletter writer on Substack and pretty big Twitter following as well, Edgar Mentum, said, this did not really teach us that much new. The Trump shooting over the weekend did not teach us that much new about our politics. And I think for that reason, it's not going to make a fundamental difference. It's not going to make a huge polling shift towards the race. Trump might go up a little bit, but we saw the first poll, post-shooting is unchanged. But I think the fundamentals of it still remain. people genuinely do hate both candidates. Think they're very extreme. Trump getting more extreme now, J.D. Vance. And who is going to better be able to make that argument to be the candidate of normalcy and stability against an extreme candidate like Trump, who has done all the things that he's done? Is it going to be somebody who people are again worried about dying at the drop of a hat? That is the fundamental argument for a switch of the ticket, which I think is still incredibly convincing, and especially to Kamala, and now more and more Democrats are as well. But this is a pretty interesting piece here from the New York Times. Reed Epstein, Lisa Lair, Katie Glueck, and Nicholas Nahemis. As a Republican convention opened on Monday, Democrats find themselves in a state of suspended animation and dread the election could be tilting further away from Biden. While there have been no new public calls for Democrats for Biden to drop out since the assassination attempt on former President Donald J. Trump on Saturday, many in the party maintain grave concerns about the president's ability to win, with that quote that pissed a lot of people off, including AOC, even though she essentially agrees with the person. We've resigned for Biden to win. For a second Trump turn. We've resigned ourselves to a second Trump turn. That is what some top Democrats are saying at this point. They're now divided on how to proceed with a weekend leader in a scrambled political environment, according to interviews on Sunday and Monday with 15 Democratic lawmakers, strategists, and activists. The last 3 weeks have been a cascade of fast-moving and damaging events for Biden. His awful debate performance set out rounds of a Democratic second-guessing about whether he'd be the best hope for the Trump administration. And the shooting on Saturday complicated what Biden's campaign believes is one of the most potent campaign messages, that Trump poses an immediate and active threat to American democracy. Trump's in-the-moment response, the raised fist and bloody face that instantly became a defining image, sent Democrats into another tailspin. And then, as if the Democratic mood were not sour enough, on Monday morning, Judge Eileen Cannon dismissed the documents case, the classified documents case against Trump in Florida, removing a major legal threat. The vibe is grim, said Matt Bennett, the co-founder of Third Way, who had backed Biden for years. I think I haven't talked to a single Democrat who is like, things are fine. It's universal. They say. For months, the Biden campaign has argued that its best shot at re-election was to make the race a referendum on Trump. Now, with the opening of the Republican National Convention and Trump's selection of J.D. Vance, the junior senator from Ohio, as his running mate, Democrats will finally have that direct contrast. Many worry it might not be all that good for Biden. Much may depend on how Trump and Republicans conduct themselves during their convention. Campaign aides have encouraged speakers to avoid overheated language and to focus on unifying the country after an unsettling moment of violence. Polling since the debate has remained mixed, with some surveys showing Trump widening his lead and others reflecting a race that still remains close. New York Times anti-college poll that we just talked about said Trump is ahead in Pennsylvania and catching up in Virginia, as Kamala, again, is in better positions in both of those places. Again, I think we really, if we're the Democratic Party, I hate to be this kind of very partisan type of person here, and just with the Democratic Party, I feel like we just need to be more serious. And it would be really nice, again, if the Democratic Party is more serious about the threat that we're facing here. Like, this is going to be a really, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and a kind of administrative state bullpen increased by the Heritage Foundation, and the kind of cohesion that wasn't there in the past between the Heritage Foundation and, the Donald Trump project. That stuff is there. He does have a lot of people who are going to staff the administration and do really bad things. And an administration with Trump and with J.D. Vance is going to be is going to be a real vehicle to do a lot of damage to the country. It's not going to be a country that is fundamentally the same when they're done with it, even with just one presidential term, especially if they're doing as well as they are. We got, Chrissy Houlihan was one of the members. There was many members, throughout that have been telling Biden, I'm losing this swing state. Senate Democrats are still doing well for now, but with the ticket splitting, is there really going to be that much ticket splitting when we have, we talked about this on the shows last week about the Democratic senators running, 12 to 5 points higher than Joe Biden. These margins are not going to hold if American politics is anything like the way it's been since around 2008. So it is a very, very dangerous situation for Democrats, and it's a situation, as we've talked about, that elites have fundamentally gotten themselves into with their continued support of Joe Biden. My first reaction to the shooting on Saturday was God damn, they got to get serious. They got to get Biden out of there, and they got to get a real game face on. But instead, as we talked about on Sunday, the reaction was, oh well, I guess we'll just give up. And it's just like that. It's just an absolutely unacceptable. It's really horrific. And it's like, what more would you expect from a Democratic Party who, except for when it comes to fighting the left, that is all they've done. They've just given up. They've said, oh, I wish I was more brave. Oh, I wish I could have done this better. Like, they all know. They probably know better than us. They've seen data points that we haven't seen. They've had interactions. They've heard stories about interaction with Biden that we have no idea about. But they refuse to do anything because they are afraid, because they don't have that kind of outside leadership. And the Democrats who are in that position to make that push are, they're fundamentally afraid. They don't want to be the ones seen as owning the loss. So they're just in a state of complete stasis. As even if the shooting doesn't have a big effect, Biden is already in a position where he is easily set to lose, and we see Kamala now doing better and better and better. Like, this is a really actively scary situation. The Democrats should be winning this election. If they had a competent candidate that didn't have the age anchor around their neck, they would have been in a much better position. And their refusal to do this position is simply because of fear, because of careerism, because of keeping their powder dry for 2028, and they are dooming us all through this inaction to more Trump presidency. And this is just the same for you. This applies to people like AOC who are calling out the defeatist Democratic rhetoric, and it calls to the people who are saying that defeatist Democratic rhetoric in the first place. Like, you guys all know the problem. At least the people leaking anonymously are being honest about the problem. But, you got people like AOC being like, we got to unify behind Joe Biden now to win this. It's just like, give me a break. Not like, no one takes that seriously. You're not going to get anything from it except for Vice President J.D. Vance and President Donald J. Trump for 4 more years. It is completely unacceptable. And really, just deeply depressing and sign of a truly rotting party. So we do know that Biden is facing a lot of problems, with some of the more moderate voters, some of the more people who, I voted for Biden last time because I don't like Trump, but I can't justify it now because he's too old. Those type of people have been really drawing concerns, have been kind of outraged about Biden's, the Democratic Party's refusal to do anything about this kind of clear and present danger of Biden's age. But there has been some real drop-off in Biden's younger support, in some of these blue states like New York, New Jersey, where we're seeing some real bad polling numbers for Biden because of his drop-off among, young and non-white Democrats with regard to Gaza. Here today, in an interview with Complex News, of all places, he defended his record in a pretty outrageous way.
But you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And the Zionist is about whether or not Israel is a safe haven for Jews because of their history of how they've been persecuted.
So, again, before this, he's asked, he pulls this whole BS. Like, he's asked, why are you such a strong supporter of Israel? And I wish I had kind of a more astute, no offense to this guy, I don't really know who he is, but he seems to be more kind of a cultural guy. But he did put Biden, put some of the tough questions to Biden here, but I wish he could have, followed up a little bit more. Not everyone has, the kind of experience in the field or knowledge in the field to do that. But he goes, why are you such a supporter of Israel? And Biden goes, no Jew in the world would be safe without Israel. Well, I think it almost sounds like threatening and to do in a weird way to a lot of the world's Jews who do not live in Israel, which is the majority of them. So he says, goes on from there and talks about Zionism. And he's going to ask him, are you a Zionist here?
You a Zionist?
Yes. Now you'll be able to make a lot out of it because people don't know what a Zionist is.
What?
Do you know what a Zionist is?
I just ask questions, I don't answer.
By the way, I'm the guy that did more for the Palestinian community than anybody. I'm the guy that opened up all the assets. I'm the guy that made sure that I got the Egyptians to open the border to let good goods through, medicine and food. But what's happening is, and I'm the guy that's been able to pull together the Arab states to agree to help the Palestinians with food and shelter. I'm the guy, and so it's not, Well, you don't have to be a Jew to be a...
So again, I kind of loop back there, but like then you see this kind of mumbling off and trailing off there in a really kind of incoherent way, and I was just like straining to hear it when I was listening to the, kind of in a more open space, because I could hear the guy asking the questions fine, but just like he's just like mumbling. But like we get down to the substance of what he is saying. Like this is anyone who considers themselves somebody who is pro-Palestinian in any vague way, even. Should not vote for Joe Biden. He is somebody who's proudly supported Israel, who's really done nothing for the Palestinians except for kill them, either indirectly or directly, through his direct action or through arming Israelis, soldiers that go on to do the same thing. Everybody knows about his continued. He held up, a few bombs, like 2 or 3 2,000-pound bombs that Israel still has been using en masse anyway to target civilian after civilian, continue to send them support, continue to provide them diplomatic cover, even after he supposedly had a problem with how they went into Rafah and all that. He essentially just didn't want to create a situation where en masse people would have to push for the Egyptian border, and he was able to hold that off because it would be too much of an untenable situation in the region, too much of an untenable situation for him at home. But he's let them kill and take over and destroy as much of Gaza as they have wanted, while still essentially keeping most of the Palestinian population in place and less, a very small minority going to Europe, or sorry, to Egypt. And with that, you have him, talking about the aid. Like, I open up the crossings now, more aid is coming in. Like, you can really directly see, first of all, with all this talk about aid, it's just so offensively just wrong and stupid, because Biden has, first of all, if we talk about some of the biggest assaults and, biggest drops on aid, the Rafah assault, which essentially Biden greenlit in exchange for a lesser Israeli retaliatory strike on Iran, that is what's cut off aid to the lowest levels of the war, which are up until now. Like if you search up, why food is piling up on the edge of Gaza in The Economist, there's a chart that essentially shows the incredible drop off from food in terms of aid trucks entering per day, not just food. It was up before the Israeli assault on Rafah. Prior to this, it was about 500-600 trucks a day. It was up to 300 prior to October 7th. It was at 500-600. But before the Israeli assault on Rafah, it was around 300 trucks a day. Now it's around 75 to 50 in the wake of that, and that's something that Biden greenlit, A, and B, has not in any way intervened to stop the severity of, including, when we get to a moment, a horrific bombing, killing 90 people in a safe zone, designated Israeli safe zone area, kind of filled with people fleeing from Rafah. They've had to essentially play, musical land for the Palestinians, not just over the past 76 years, but over the past few months after this invasion of Rafah, where they're pushing more people out, pushing more people into areas they've already destroyed. And they aid, because they shut down the main crossing with Egypt where all the trucks are, has completely dropped off a cliff. And then the absolutely offensive, the ridiculous humanitarian aid pier that delivered literally no aid and essentially let a bunch of Israeli troops in to go massacre Palestinian civilians en masse in exchange for the rescue of 4 hostages. That was what, after that period, and again, this is an aid pier that Netanyahu asked Biden to do, probably for reasons like this, probably for, easier access, military incursion through the shield of the United States. This was something that really was a kind of detriment to aid, because this was, Israel used this, the U.S. used this as an excuse to, continue hindering the more international, more successful efforts from the UN and from others to say, U.S. is going to run it by themselves. We have the humanitarian aid pier. That also caused a pretty massive drop-off in terms of aid around the kind of February, March, April months, until it began, pick back up when they opened another, crossing. So, this is something that Biden has had a deep role in, and those decisions, especially how he's handled Israel assaulting Rafah and how he's handled the decision to essentially acquiesce in Netanyahu and do this humanitarian aid pier, that's probably been the two most influential things in terms of aid access into Gaza, and they've both had a severely negative impact. So it's kind of an important thing to say and to highlight there. I do want to close out the show with this testimony from the Mawasi massacre. 90 people buried in the sand in this kind of horrific, quote-unquote safe zone where they just shoved a bunch of people into a very, underdeveloped area of Gaza where there's just nothing, no plumbing, no running water, no access to power, no nothing. And they decided essentially to stick 2 million people in there. That was the plan. Then until they decided to bomb it 2 days ago and kill 90 people. In a crater in the ground, this is from Mondo Weiss here. In a crater in the ground, almost larger than a schoolyard, a group of young men dig through the sand and pull out the bodies. His head is there. His head is there, someone yells. A man emerges from the hole carrying a child. Who knows who this child is? Who knows his family? Where are his parents? He calls out. Behind him are dead bodies and severed limbs scattered across the ground. Some poke out from beneath the sand, half buried. When the Israeli army struck the coastal displacement camp of al-Mawasi west of Khan Yunis, there was no rubble. The Israeli-designated safe zone was little more than a sea of tents on the beach, so people were buried in the sand instead. Wow. At 10 a.m. on Saturday, while people were starting their day, the Israeli military targeted the area with successive airstrikes, leading to a massacre that, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, as of time of writing, killed 90 people and injured over 300 others. Half of them are women and children, the health ministry has said. Shaima Farwane, 16, was near the site of the massacre when it happened. She was preparing to make breakfast for her family when the bombs fell. People and sand scattered everywhere. Limbs that were once attached to bodies flying over their heads. A leg hit me. I saw dismembered bodies a few meters away, Shaima told Mondo Weiss. I saw a young child screaming. He lost his lower limbs and was crawling on his hands and screaming. The bombs didn't stop, and suddenly the boy disappeared. I saw how he vanished before me while we ran and lowered our eyes to the ground, unable to do anything but run. Shaima describes hearing 7 explosions in short succession before it was over. What a life we live in these tents, that we have to see the dismembered bodies of our siblings and family fly over our heads. When the ambulance and the civil defense crews arrived near a well-known crowded market for residents of the area, the vehicles were targeted as well, according to the director of civil defense at Khan Yunis, Yaman Abu Suleiman. 2 civil defense workers were killed in the strike. Abu Suleiman said the occupation targeted al-Mawasi with a large barrage of missiles, many of which led to many casualties. The occupation targeted the area more than once to prevent us from mounting any rescue operation, he tells Mondo West, announcing the silence of the International Committee of the Red Cross over Israel's prevention of rescue teams from doing their work. Israel claims the airstrikes were an attempt to assassinate Mohammed al-Daif, the head of the armed wing of the Al-Qassam Brigades, as well as the commander of the Al-Qassam Khan Yunis District Brigade, Rafi Salama. The Gaza government media office denies that Israel's claims, emphasizes they are nothing but a way of diverting the world's attention from the reality of the massacre that the Israeli army committed as part of the genocide of Gaza's people. According to the local sources, over 80,000 displaced people currently reside in tents in the area. So, again, this is a bunker buster bomb targeting thousands and thousands of people, in which at least 90, almost certainly more, 186,000 people killed total. So, the counting here is vastly conservative on the Gaza Health Office side. It's just unimaginable. Fawzia Sheikh Youssef was buried in the sand. She's 82 years old, but she survived. She was 6 years old during the Nakba of 1940, coming to the Khan Yunis area and staying with her family for 2 years in a tent. 76 years later, she found herself back where she started, but this time witnessing massacres the likes of which she had never seen during the Nakba. There is no country in all the world that does this to children, women, and civilians. This isn't how wars are. Fawzia was eating her breakfast when the bomb ripped through her encampment, demolishing her tent and trapping her underneath. She found herself covered in sand and trapped inside, but was not critically injured. She began crawling on the ground and extricated herself from beneath the tent, eventually escaping to a place far away from the shrapnel and missiles closer to the main road. I saw before my eyes one missile after another descending next to the tents. Missiles I should have never seen in all my life in Gaza's wars. Isn't this internationally forbidden? Shouldn't the civilian population be protected and not face genocide and mass killing? Isn't this forbidden? They killed young people, old women. They do not respect humans. Aren't we human, she continues? There is nothing to protect us from these missiles. The tents fell on our heads. I was hit with 2 pieces of shrapnel in my leg. I may get poisoned, and I did not harm anyone. These are not humanitarian actions, Fawzia said. A normal state would know that children have value and women have value. Their lives are respected. Killing them is forbidden. There are wars. Some countries fight in the world, but not like this. Not like what happens with us. Sama Al-Farah, a survivor of the massacre, says she fled from the horror of the missiles, leaving her son behind without knowing what she was doing. She describes what she saw after the incident as witnessing the horrors of the day of resurrection. The sound of the explosion, the panic of the people around her, the stampede and the attempt to escape, women leaving their tents without even wearing their clothes. Sama has to live with witnessing all these brutal scenes. People were running. There was sand in our eyes and fire over our heads. I left my son behind me and started running. I found the world turned upside down. The bodies of martyrs were next to us, cut into pieces. It was a massacre. The fragments, sand, and bodies flew over our heads as we ran, Salma describes. She says that if this density of missiles had fallen on fortified buildings, it would have destroyed them. But what about when they fall on tents whose owners are protected only by a piece of cloth? She describes the scene as a shower of missiles falling 4 times in a row, with more than one explosion occurring during each shower. We saved ourselves, and if we had stayed where we were, we would have been cut up and buried under the sand. Media reports have said the bombs used in Al-Mawasi are JDAMs made in the good old US of A, which turn into highly destructive unguided bombs into more precise missiles. So not only were these highly destructive bombs, but they had this JDAM technology on it, which made sure that they knew exactly where they were hitting. They didn't try and use a small bomb. They used many, many big bombs. Even if they were trying to assassinate this commander of Qassam brigades. Again, the question is, and the question that they will never answer, or never, one day hopefully will answer, maybe in another life, which is why the hell were they using all these bombs, targeting all these kids, targeting an 80,000 strong refugee camp of people where you told people time and time again to flee to. It's indefensible. Even if Mohammed Daif there was standing there waving his arms, it's just something that would not have been defensible. Aziza Abu Tahir sits in front of the devastation after the bombing. Scattered bags of flour, gallons of water, vegetables, pillowcases, and utensils in the litter area. She owns an oven and sits beside it every day. The women of the camp send their dough to her to bake for a small fee. When they dropped the bombs above our heads, all the people were running and screaming and saying that they were incendiary bombs, and this was the first time we have heard a sound like this, as Aziza told Mondo Weiss. We ran away, and no one knew where to run. Some people went from one direction and were bombed, and some of them went from another direction and survived, but no one knew where they were going. As she speaks, a small child is hugging her, the son of her neighbor. Aziza says his mother takes care of orphans, and explains when the attack started, his mother was bringing some dough for Aziza to bake in order to resell to get an income for her family. She was just here, and I baked what she wanted, and she went to sell it. As soon as she walked away, the bombing started. I don't know where she is now, and I don't know if she will return. The entire area she was walking in was overturned, and everything was buried. Everything was buried. Just absolutely unimaginable. And, as Gaza has gotten, unfortunately shifted from the news by all the chaos regarding Biden and Trump and the shooting attempt and all that, just know here on Newsflash, although we may not cover it every single show, we will never, ever forget about Palestine and about Gaza. We'll be back on Wednesday.